At my granddaughter's engagement dinner, I noticed my place card said, "Family sponsor." Not grandma. Not my name. Just that. I stood there for a moment, holding the thick ivory card between my fingers, feeling the weight of it in a way that had nothing to do with paper. Around me, crystal glasses clinked. Laughter floated across the private dining room of a downtown Chicago steakhouse my son had insisted was perfect for the occasion. I just smiled and took my seat. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from." I never imagined that a celebration meant to honor love would quietly expose how my own family truly saw me. The room was beautiful. White roses in low silver vases. Candlelight reflecting against tall windows that overlooked the river. My granddaughter Lily looked radiant in a cream silk dress, her hand resting proudly on her fiancé's arm. At 68, I've learned not to expect grand gestures, but I did expect to feel like family. Instead, I felt like a checkbook with a pulse. 2 weeks earlier, my son Daniel had come by my condo, 1,100 square feet overlooking Lakeshore Drive, to talk logistics. That's what he called it. "Mom," he'd said, sitting across from me at the kitchen island. "You know how expensive weddings are these days. Lily deserves something unforgettable." I had nodded. Of course she did. Daniel had built a successful real estate development firm. His home in Naperville was nearly 4,500 square feet. Marble countertops. Heated floors. A 3-car garage. He wasn't struggling. Still, I wrote the check. Then another. The venue deposit. The floral upgrade. The live band instead of a DJ. Every time I hesitated, my daughter-in-law, Claire, would tilt her head and say in that gentle, polished voice of hers, "It's just this once, Margaret. You're the matriarch. It means so much." Matriarch. Yet tonight, that word was nowhere on my place card. As dinner was served, filet mignon for most, sea bass for Claire, I noticed something else. At the head of the long table sat Lily and her fiancé. To Lily's right was Daniel. To her left, Claire. Next to them, the groom's parents. I was seated halfway down, beside the event planner. The event planner. I folded my napkin neatly in my lap. Across the table, I overheard Claire laughing softly with one of the grooms. "Aunts." "Well," she said, not lowering her voice quite enough. "None of this would be possible without Margaret. She insists on taking care of everything." Insists. As if I'd push my way into financing my own granddaughter's future. The aunt smiled politely. "How generous." Claire leaned in closer. "She likes feeling needed." The words settled over me like cold rain. I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip. My hands were steady. I've hosted more dinners in my lifetime than Claire has probably attended. I know how to hold a room. I know how to hold myself. But something inside me shifted. Because generosity is one thing. Being reduced to a role, family sponsor, is another. And by the time dessert arrived, I had begun to realize this dinner wasn't about celebrating Lily's engagement. It was about establishing who paid and who belonged. Only one of those titles had my name on it. When I got home that night, I placed the little ivory card on my kitchen counter. Family sponsor. The words looked even smaller under the soft yellow light of my condo. Outside my window, the city was quiet. A few headlights moved slowly along Lakeshore Drive. The lake itself was dark and endless. I took off my heels. My feet ached. Not from standing. From understanding. For the past 2 years, ever since my husband passed, I've tried very hard not to be in the way. Daniel has his firm. Claire manages the social side of their life. Lily is building her future. I told myself my role had changed. I downsized from our 3,200 square foot family home in Evanston to this 1,100 square foot condo. I sold furniture, donated china, let go of things that had held 40 years of memories. I told myself it was practical. But if I'm honest, I was trying to make myself smaller. I live on a combination of my late husband's pension and Social Security. I'm comfortable, but I'm careful. I don't waste money. I track every utility bill. In winter, I keep the thermostat at 66 degrees. I don't complain. When Daniel first mentioned helping with the wedding, I didn't hesitate. I thought it was a blessing to contribute. A grandmother's gift. Something Lily would remember long after I'm gone. What I didn't realize was how quickly generosity turns into expectation. It started with the venue upgrade. Then the premium floral package. Then the live jazz trio instead of recorded music. Every time I wrote a check, Claire would smile that polished smile. "You have such elegant taste, Margaret." But the invoices were always emailed to her. The contracts were always in her folder. And I was always thanked publicly. Privately, decisions moved forward without me. I wasn't asked where I wanted to sit. I wasn't consulted about the guest list. I wasn't even told about tonight's seating arrangement until I arrived and saw that little card waiting for me. Family sponsor. Not mother. Not grandmother. Sponsor. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the small round table near my window. The same table where Daniel used to do homework when he was 10. Back when he needed help with fractions. Back when he would crawl into my lap after Little League and tell me every detail of his game. Back when I was simply mom. I don't blame Lily. She's young. She sees the surface, the flowers, the lights, the celebration. But Claire sees structure, optics, hierarchy. And tonight, I finally saw it too. This wasn't about excluding me from a seat. It was about redefining my position. And if there's one thing I've learned in 68 years, it's this. When someone quietly redefines your role without your consent, they've already started rewriting the ending. I just didn't know yet how far that rewrite would go. The following Sunday, Claire hosted what she called a small planning brunch at their house in Naperville. Small meant 22 people. Catered pastries. Custom printed menus. A mimosa bar set up along the marble kitchen island. I arrived on time. I always do. Claire air-kissed my cheek. Margaret, you look lovely. We're just going over final aesthetics. Final aesthetics. I noticed immediately that a large foam board stood near the dining room table. At the top, in elegant gold lettering, Whitmore, Harrison wedding below it, columns labeled, ceremony layout. Reception seating. Family table. Family table. I walked closer. At the center, Lily and her fiancé. To the right, Daniel and Claire. To the left, the groom's parents. Next to them, immediate family. Further down the chart, halfway along the extended table, M. Whitmore. No title, no relation, just my initial and last name. I stood there quietly, hands folded in front of me. Claire came up beside me. We didn't want it to feel crowded at the head table, she said softly. This keeps things balanced. Balanced. I see, I replied. Daniel was across the room, laughing with the groom's father about golf courses in Scottsdale. He didn't look over. No one asked my opinion. No one explained the reasoning. It was presented as final. I moved toward the kitchen and poured myself coffee. Lily hurried over. Grandma, isn't it beautiful? Mom worked so hard on this. It is very organized, I said. She smiled brightly. Dad said we're so lucky you're helping so much. Most grandparents don't contribute like this. Contribute. I looked at her carefully. Did anyone ask where I wanted to sit? She hesitated. I assumed you'd be near us. Assumptions are comfortable things. They require no confirmation. Claire called everyone to gather around the board. She began pointing with a slim gold pen. And here, she said, tapping near the center, is our core family unit. Core family unit. Daniel, Claire, Lily. Applause. Light laughter. Compliments about symmetry. Then Claire's pen moved slightly down the board. And of course, Margaret will be just here. Just here. The words were gentle. The placement was not. I felt eyes glance toward me briefly, then away. In that moment, something became very clear. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't oversight. It was structure. Public structure. I set my coffee cup down carefully. I have a question, I said, my voice calm and even. The room quieted just enough. Yes. Claire smiled. Since I'm funding the majority of this event, I said, not raising my tone, I'd like to understand how seating decisions are being made. Silence. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just heavy. Claire blinked once. Daniel finally looked over. And for the first time since that ivory card appeared on my table, the word sponsor no longer felt decorative. It felt contractual. No one answered immediately. Not Claire. Not Daniel. Not even Lily. It was remarkable how quickly a room filled with conversation could turn quiet without anyone raising their voice. Claire recovered first. Well, she said lightly, it's not about funding, Margaret. It's about flow. Optics. The photographer needs clean sightlines. The head table represents the new family being formed. The new family. I held her gaze. And I am what? I asked calmly. She laughed softly, as if I'd misunderstood something simple. Of course your family. We just don't want it to feel crowded. Crowded. Daniel stepped forward then. Mom, it's just seating. Let's not make it bigger than it is. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. It's just seating. I turned back to the phone board. Whitmore, Harrison wedding. Core family unit. Immediate family. M. Whitmore. There's a difference between being loved privately and being acknowledged publicly. Weddings are public. Structure matters. I'm not upset, I said evenly. I just want clarity. Claire folded her hands together. Clarity about what? About my role, I replied. Another silence. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, you're helping us. We're grateful. Helping. Grateful. Both words carefully chosen. I'm not helping, I said gently. I'm underwriting. That word landed differently. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Claire's smile tightened just slightly. We never asked you to think of it that way. No, I agreed. You didn't. And that was the point. No one had asked how I wanted to think of it. No one had asked how I wanted to be seen. The conversation dissolved after that. Claire redirected attention back to linen samples. Daniel drifted toward the patio with the groom's father. But something had shifted. People glanced at me differently now. Not as decoration. Not as a benefactor. As leverage. I stayed another 20 minutes. I complimented the centerpieces. I hugged Lily goodbye. Then I drove back to Chicago alone. Traffic was light. The late afternoon sun reflected off the highway in long streaks of gold. I wasn't angry. Anger is loud. This felt quiet. Precise. When I arrived home, I didn't pour wine. I didn't call a friend. I walked straight to my desk. The stack of printed contracts was still there. So were the trust documents. External sponsor. Underwriter. Matriarch. Titles can be assigned by others. Authority cannot. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in over a year. Richard Hale, estate attorney. My husband trusted him completely. And suddenly, I realized something important. If I was going to be treated like a financial instrument, then it was time to start behaving like one. Richard answered on the second ring. Margaret. It's been a while. His voice hadn't changed. Steady. Measured. The kind of voice that doesn't react before it understands. Yes, I said. It has. We scheduled a meeting for Tuesday morning. At his office downtown. No urgency in my tone. No drama. Just a request to review my trust documents and recent financial distributions. On Tuesday, I wore navy. Nothing severe. Nothing soft. Richard's office overlooked the Chicago River. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Darkwood shelves. The same leather chairs my husband and I had sat in 3 years ago when we signed everything. Richard folded his hands on the desk. What's prompting this review? I'd like to understand my options, I said. Regarding conditional gifting, public designation, misrepresentation. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I slid the printed vendor contracts across the desk. He adjusted his glasses and read quietly. External sponsor. He looked up at me. Did you approve this designation? No. Was it disclosed? No. Was the amount substantial? Yes. He leaned back slowly. Margaret, under the clause your husband insisted on, any gift exceeding $50,000 that is publicly reframed in a manner inconsistent with familial designation can be reevaluated. Reevaluated. The word felt calm. Clinical. What does reevaluated mean? I asked. It means, he said evenly, you may convert it from a gift to a structured loan, or retract pending distributions, or adjust future inheritance allocations to account for reputational or fiduciary misclassification. He paused. In plain English, if someone wants to treat you like an external financial entity, the law allows you to operate like one. I nodded once. And if I choose to do nothing? I asked. Then nothing changes, he replied. But precedent is established. Precedent. That word stayed with me. When I left his office, the air outside was cool and sharp. Early spring in Chicago. The kind of day where the wind off the lake reminds you that warmth is never permanent. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt informed. That evening, Daniel called again. Mom, Claire felt like things were tense Sunday. She thinks maybe you misunderstood. I understood perfectly, I said. A pause. We're family, he added. Yes, I replied. We are. Family. It's a beautiful word. But it only works when everyone stands inside the circle. I looked at the folder on my desk once more. The remaining wedding balance was due in 3 weeks. And for the first time since this engagement began, I hadn't yet written the check. 3 days passed. No one mentioned the balance. No one asked whether the final venue payment had been scheduled. Claire continued posting. Wedding updates online. Floral previews. Linen swatches. A caption that read, So grateful for everyone helping make this day possible. Everyone. I watched quietly. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was the venue coordinator. Mrs. Whitmore? We're just confirming the remaining balance of $47,800. We haven't received the transfer yet. Her voice was polite. Professional. I understand, I said. Please hold processing until further notice. A pause. Of course, she replied carefully. I ended the call and sat very still. Not to punish. Not to threaten. To observe. That evening, Daniel arrived at my condo unannounced. He hasn't done that in years. He looked tired. Not angry. Just unsettled. Mom, the venue called Claire. They said you asked them to hold payment. Yes, I said. He ran a hand through his hair. Why? I gestured for him to sit. Daniel, I began calmly. Do you know how I'm listed on the wedding contracts? He hesitated. As the contributor? External sponsor. I corrected. He blinked. I didn't draft that, he said quickly. Claire handles the paperwork. I know. He looked around my condo. The framed photos, the quiet order of everything. His eyes landed on the folder on my desk. Are you trying to pull funding? He asked carefully. I'm reviewing structure, I said. That's not how families operate. I met his eyes. Families don't reclassify mothers without a conversation. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. He exhaled slowly. Mom, it's just terminology. No, I said gently. Terminology reflects hierarchy. He didn't respond. So I continued. If I am an external sponsor, then payments should be structured. Timelines agreed upon. Roles clarified. If I am family, then public acknowledgement should reflect that. He stared at the floor for a moment. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. No, I replied softly. I'm making it accurate. Silence filled the room. Not hostile. Heavy. I need to know, I said finally, before I release the remaining funds. What role you and Claire believe I hold in this family? He looked up at me then, not as a son seeking money, but as a man realizing the transaction had shifted. Because this was no longer about a seating chart. It was about position. And for the first time, the balance wasn't only financial. It was structural. Daniel didn't answer my question right away. Instead, he stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the lake like he used to when he was a teenager, trying to think his way out of trouble. Mom, he said finally, you're overanalyzing wording. Claire didn't mean anything by it. I'm not questioning intention, I replied. I'm questioning alignment. He turned back toward me. What does that even mean? It means, I said evenly, that if I am presented publicly as an external financial contributor, then privately, I need to understand whether that's how I'm viewed. His jaw tightened slightly. No one views you that way. The contracts do. Silence. He sat back down, slower this time. You're my mother, he said. Lily's grandmother. Of course you're family. Then why wasn't I placed at the family table? I asked. He opened his mouth. Closed it. That was Claire's decision about optics, he said carefully. The photographer recommended Daniel. I didn't raise my voice. I funded the photographer. That landed. He looked tired again. Not defensive. Just confronted with something he hadn't examined closely. I didn't review the seating chart, he admitted. I know, I said. That was the deeper issue. He hadn't reviewed it. He hadn't noticed. He hadn't asked. When your father was alive, I continued gently, no one would have labeled us external. His expression shifted at that. That's not fair, he said quietly. I'm not being unfair, I replied. I'm being factual. The room felt smaller for a moment. Not hostile, just clear. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What do you want, Mom? He asked. Clarity. But I didn't say that. I want acknowledgement, I said instead. Not gratitude. Not praise. Alignment. And if Claire changes the wording? He asked. If she moves the seat? It's not about the seat, I said softly. It's about whether I am included in the definition of core. He rubbed his hands together slowly. You're putting me in the middle, he said. No, I answered. I'm asking you to define the center. That's when his phone buzzed. Claire. He glanced at the screen. Then at me. This is getting complicated, he murmured. No, I said calmly. It's becoming transparent. He stood up. So what happens if we don't agree? He asked. I met his eyes. Then the remaining funds will be restructured. He went still. As a loan? He asked. As appropriate, I replied. He nodded once. Not in agreement. In realization. Because, for the first time since this engagement began, he understood that the balance of power had quietly shifted. And it hadn't shifted emotionally. It had shifted legally. Daniel left that evening without raising his voice. That worried me more than if he had. When the door closed behind him, the condo felt unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something irreversible has been said. I didn't call Richard. I didn't email the venue. I waited. The next morning, Claire called. Not texted. Called. Margaret, she began, her tone smooth but tighter than usual. Daniel told me you're reconsidering the wedding payments. I'm reviewing structure, I replied. A small exhale on the other end. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said. The term external sponsor is standard vendor language. Standard for whom? I asked. For accounting, she replied quickly. It separates contributors from the contracting couple. Contributors. Contracting couple. Language is never accidental. I see, I said calmly. And the seating placement. That was about visual symmetry, she answered. We can adjust that if it's truly upsetting you. Upsetting. I let that word pass. It's not about being upset, I said. It's about representation. There was a pause long enough for the air to thicken. You know we appreciate you, she added. Appreciation. Gratitude. They were offering emotional currency. I was discussing structural currency. Claire, I said gently, when you introduced the head table as the core family unit, did you consider how that would sound? Silence. Then carefully. The core unit is the couple and their parents. And I am what? I asked again. Your extended family, she replied. There it was. Clear. Unpolished. Extended. I didn't react. Extended means outside the center. Outside the center means outside the decision-making circle. Outside the circle means optional. I understand, I said evenly. That's not what I meant, she corrected quickly. It's what you said. Another silence. Are you threatening to pull the funds? She asked finally. No, I replied. I'm deciding whether I'm investing in something I'm not part of. The distinction mattered. That afternoon, I received an updated seating chart by email. My name had been moved. Closer to the head table. Still not at it. A compromise. Not inclusion. I stared at the revised document for a long time. This wasn't about proximity. It was about acknowledgement. And Claire had made her position clear. Core. Extended. External. 3 tiers. Only one of them required my signature to continue. For the first time since Lily announced her engagement, I realized something difficult. I wasn't being pushed out loudly. I was being categorized quietly. And quiet classifications are the ones that last the longest. I closed my laptop. The remaining balance was still unpaid. And now, the decision wasn't emotional. It was mathematical. That evening, I didn't look at the revised seating chart again. I didn't need to. Claire had clarified her position. Daniel had confirmed his distance from the details. The structure was visible now. Core. Extended. External. 3 circles. Only one required funding. The next morning, I called Richard. I'd like to restructure the remaining wedding balance, I said. As a loan, he asked. As a conditional disbursement, I replied. With documentation. He didn't hesitate. We can draft a short agreement. Funds released upon written acknowledgement of designation and role. Designation and role. The words sounded clinical. That was intentional. By noon, a simple 2-page document was prepared. It outlined the total contributions to date, the remaining balance pending, a clarification of my familial designation in public materials and seating representation, a clause converting the remaining payment into a formal loan if public classification remained external. No emotion, just alignment. I forwarded the document to Daniel first, not Claire. His reply came 3 hours later. Mom, this is excessive. I stared at the word for a long time. Excessive. Was it excessive to want clarity? To request acknowledgement equal to contribution? Or was it simply unfamiliar? He called shortly after. Claire feels attacked, he said. I'm not attacking, I replied calmly. I'm defining. You're turning a wedding into a contract. No, I said. The contract already exists. I'm just reading it. Silence. Do you really need this in writing? He asked. Yes. Why? Because spoken gratitude fades. Because verbal reassurance disappears under pressure. Because structure is what remains. But I didn't say all that. I need consistency, I answered. He exhaled. You're making this about power. No, I said softly. I'm making it about position. There was a difference. Power demands. Position defines. By evening, Claire emailed me directly. The tone was polished. Margaret, While we appreciate your generosity, we feel formal documentation undermines the spirit of family. Spirit. A beautiful word. But Spirit doesn't sign vendor agreements. Spirit doesn't wire $47,800. Structure does. I read her email twice. Then I closed my laptop. The remaining balance was still sitting in my account. Untouched. Available. Conditional. And for the first time since this engagement began, they were the ones waiting on my decision. 2 days later, Daniel asked if we could meet. Not at my condo. Not at his house. Neutral ground. We chose a quiet cafe just off Michigan Avenue. Mid-morning. Few people. Soft jazz playing overhead. Claire arrived with him. That told me everything. We sat across from each other at a small round table. No raised voices. No theatrics. Just structure meeting resistance. Claire spoke first. We reviewed the document, she said, folding her hands neatly. It feels transactional. It is transactional, I replied evenly. The wedding contracts are transactional. The payments are transactional. This is family, she insisted. And families clarify expectations, I said. Daniel looked between us. Mom, he began carefully. Claire and I are building our own household. The head table reflects that. It's not a rejection. I never said it was, I answered. Claire leaned forward slightly. Then why tie funding to seating? I didn't, I said. I tied funding to designation. Silence. The difference mattered. Daniel lowered his voice. What exactly are you asking for? Public acknowledgement that I am not an external party, I said. And placement consistent with immediate family. Claire's expression tightened. You are extended family. There it was again. Extended. I nodded slowly. Then extended family does not underwrite core events without agreement. The words were calm, not sharp. Claire exhaled through her nose. So if we don't change the language? Then the remaining funds convert to a loan, I replied. Daniel shifted in his seat. With interest. Minimal, I said. Structured. Documented. Claire stared at me for a long moment. You're willing to risk tension over this? She asked. No, I answered. I'm unwilling to fund ambiguity. That quieted the table. The server passed by. No one touched their coffee. Daniel finally spoke. If we update the materials, remove external sponsor, and clarify seating, will you release the balance as a gift? Yes, I said. Claire's jaw tightened slightly. And if we don't, then we proceed formally. No anger. No threat. Just options. We sat there for another minute in silence. Claire looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at me. For the first time since this engagement began, they weren't deciding how to arrange me. They were deciding how to define me. And the payment deadline was 4 days away. The deadline arrived on a Friday. At 9:12 a.m., I received an email from Claire. Subject line, updated materials. Attached were 3 documents. The revised vendor contract. The updated digital program draft. The new seating chart. I opened the contract first, where it had once read, M. Whitmore, external sponsor. It now read, Margaret Whitmore, grandmother of the bride, no embellishment. No decorative title, just accurate. I moved to the digital program draft. Under family acknowledgments, there was a line added beneath Daniel and Claire's names, with gratitude to Margaret Whitmore, beloved mother and grandmother, for her unwavering support. Beloved. The word felt softer than the document itself. Then I opened the seating chart. The head table remained structured around Lily and her fiancé. To Lily's right, Daniel. To her left, Claire. And directly beside Daniel, my name. Not halfway down. Not labeled. Placed. Not extended. Included. I closed my laptop slowly. 10 minutes later, Daniel called. We made the changes, he said quietly. I saw. A pause. Claire didn't mean to make you feel excluded. I wasn't feeling, I said gently. I was observing. He exhaled, almost a small laugh. You've always been precise. Yes, I replied. Structure matters. Another silence, but this one was different. Less defensive, more reflective. Will you release the funds? He asked. Yes, I said. As a gift. I logged into my banking portal. $47,800. I authorized the transfer. Within minutes, the confirmation email arrived. The balance was paid. The structure adjusted. The designation clarified. Later that afternoon, Claire sent a short message. Thank you, Margaret. We appreciate everything you do for this family. Family. The word felt more stable now. Not because it was spoken, but because it had been defined. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to, because something had already shifted permanently. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in understanding. They now knew that placement was not cosmetic. Titles were not decorative, and contributions were not silent. For the first time since Lily announced her engagement, I was no longer being categorized quietly. I was being acknowledged publicly, and that distinction would last far beyond the wedding day. The wedding day arrived bright and windless. Chicago surprised us with one of those rare, perfect afternoons. Clear sky, soft light, just enough warmth to make the lake shimmer without the sharp edge of spring wind. I arrived early, not to inspect anything, not to correct anything, just to be present. The venue doors were open, white florals lining the entrance exactly as planned. Guests filtered in slowly, adjusting jackets, greeting one another with that soft excitement weddings always carry. Inside, the reception hall was glowing. I walked toward the seating display. Whitmore, Harrison wedding. The board had been reprinted. No initials, no classifications, just names arranged in clean script. When I reached the head table, I paused. There it was, Lily at the center, her fiancé beside her, Daniel to her right, and next to Daniel, Margaret Whitmore. Not abbreviated, not shifted, placed. I touched the back of the chair lightly, not to claim it, just to acknowledge it. Lily found me before the ceremony began. She wrapped her arms around me tightly. "Grandma," she whispered, "I'm so glad you're right there with us." Right there. Not extended, not external. Right there. When the music started and she walked down the aisle, I didn't think about contracts, or clauses, or seating charts. I thought about the little girl who used to sit at my kitchen table coloring with crayons while I baked cookies. I thought about the years in between, and I realized something simple. In families, love is emotional, but position is structural. One without the other creates imbalance. During the reception, Daniel stood to give a toast. He thanked the guests. He praised the couple. Then he turned slightly toward me. "And to my mother," he said, his voice steady, "for always reminding us that family isn't just something you say, it's something you honor." He didn't look embarrassed. He looked aware. That was enough. Claire met my eyes briefly from across the table. Not defensive, not polished, just acknowledging. Later that night, as the music played and Lily danced with her new husband, I sat quietly for a moment and looked around the room. Everything was beautiful, but what mattered most wasn't the flowers, or the lighting, or the seating. It was this. I had not demanded a throne. I had not raised my voice. I had not withdrawn in silence. I had defined my place, and once defined, it was respected. When I left the venue, the air outside was cool again. The lake beyond the buildings reflected city lights like scattered glass. I walked to my car slowly, not because I was tired, because I was steady. They thought this was about money. It never was. It was about position. And I learned something important through all of it. You don't have to shout to be seen. You just have to refuse to be mislabeled. If you've ever felt quietly repositioned in your own family, tell me where you're watching from. And remember, being older does not make you optional. It makes you foundational.